comfortable being on camera, we welcome you to turn your cameras off if that's more comfortable. As I said, this is climate engagement for systems change. We'll be together until 3 p.m. GMT time here in Glasgow. Melvin, could we get to the next slide, please? So I know many of you are now Zoom experts, but just very quickly, as we are on Zoom, please remain on mute unless you're speaking so that we don't have any feedback in the background. So what are we going to do today? So really quickly, we're going to hear a little bit from my colleague Robin Prest on what we have learned so far at COP26. We'll have a fireside chat with our esteemed panelists today, Carole Excell, who's the Director of Environmental Democracy Practice at the World Resources Institute, Doreen Grove, who's the Head of Open Government for the Government of Scotland, who are so generously hosting us here in Glasgow, and Dr. Kanongnij Sribuaiam, who is Associate Professor, Faculty of Law at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. And then the rest of the conversation will be in small groups with a number of our partners. So you will hear about different facets of climate engagement, from place-based engagement to the role of open government to how cities do climate engagement. And we'll end the session with a short synthesis from each of our host partners here. So this will go fast, I hope, but will be very interesting for everyone. Next slide, please. So here at the Center for Dialogue, we do invite people to come to dialogues in good spirit and in good heart. So a few rules for some of you. Please remain on mute unless you're speaking. We invite you to be open to other perspectives. Disagreement is normal. And we want to use this opportunity to really clarify and understand new ideas. Because we have such a short time together, I would like to ask you to be disciplined in your participation. Try to be brief and focused and on topic so we can leave lots of time for other people to also interact in these dialogues. Again, if you have a long story, maybe try to summarize it so we don't take the whole day. Speak personally and from the heart. It's better to share stories of lived experiences and personal values rather than cliches and set opinions. And this is a space to be inquisitive and curious. So ask thoughtful questions and really listen openly to answers. And finally, one that is very important to me, please center dignity in this space. We want to respect each other here and really acknowledge that even though we come from different lived experiences and realities, we all bring something valuable to this discussion. So with that, if I could just get some waves from everyone that you are in agreement with these terms, we can then get started. Wonderful. I see lots of smiles. Great. Fantastic. Start right in, and our first speaker today is my wonderful colleague Robin Prest, who is the Director of Programs at the Maurice J. Waugh Center for Dialogue. And I'm going to invite Robin to give us a bit of a perspective on what's been happening at COP. So as you can see, it's right in the middle of it in the action zone in the blue zone. So Robin, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like right now to be at COP?
Elodie, it's a madhouse here at COP. There are right behind me in the action zone, you can see a world, a huge globe that's slowly turning around and revolving from the ceiling. And that globe might as well be an onion because there's layer upon layer here within COP. Currently we're within the blue zone, which is where you need to be accredited in order to attend. Even within the blue zone, there's even an inner layer where the negotiators are allowed and others don't have the same access. Outside the blue zone, of course, you have the green zone, which is still curated by the UNFCCC and by the UK government, but a place for civil society to gather. And then you also have a People's Summit going on outside in protests. Just to give you a sense of how disconnected these spheres can be. The other day, I was inside the blue zone all day. And it wasn't until I walked out at around 5 p.m. that I picked up my phone and I looked at the BBC News and I saw that there had been 100,000 person protest just a kilometer or two outside the blue zone that hadn't even permeated my consciousness during that entire day. And I think that that's a bit of a metaphor as far as some of the different experiences of COP and some of the issues of access that many participants are bringing up. And not necessarily from the perspective, at least here within the blue zone, from being right or wrong, or a bad zone or a good zone, but just from a sense of the silos that exist within these worlds. And then I would also say all the worlds and silos and realities that exist outside these venues all around the world. And if we have trouble connecting what's happening in the green zone to the blue zone, we're perhaps doing a very bad job connecting what's happening in the blue zone with the on the street everyday reality of people around the world.
Robin, I think that's an amazing analogy for the work of folks who are doing climate engagement in different spheres. But from your perspective, and what have we learned so far about climate engagement at COP26? What were the important announcements that you've heard that we should all be paying attention to in this moment in time?
Yeah, and maybe I'll go through the different layers that I just described as far as things that we've learned during COP. At that very inner layer, there's the ACE agenda that's being negotiated, and that's the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda. And as far as the conversations I've had, there's ongoing debates about whether or not that is only going to focus mostly on education and a sense of empowerment being defined as education and sort of a narrow curricular sort of understanding, or if that's going to be broadened to include commitments towards actual engagement that allows for two-way exchanges. Even terms like human rights within that text can be controversial, as all the different parties to COP need to agree upon the final text. So there's open questions whether or not those negotiated texts are actually a place for agreement. Within the negotiations and the leader summit that happened here on the first couple of days of COP, there were also a slew of announcements about trying to move the dial as far as commitments to reduce global warming, reduce emissions, and there's very much either a half glass full perspective that was perhaps summarized by the International Energy Agency, which has said that we're closer, if we fulfill those commitments, to around a 1.8 degrees warming now, rather than, I believe it was a 3.8 degrees that we were on a trajectory for before COP. And then of course, the half glass empty perspective is that those are just commitments, and governments still aren't moving fast enough to actually solve the problem. And of course, you hear that on the stage. You hear that from certainly outside the venue very much. On the stages within the sessions that happen more broadly in the blue zone, I've heard a lot of descriptive sort of platitudes saying we need to listen to the people. There have been only a few sessions though that have really got into how we can actually do that, and I think there's a huge disconnect between the typical approach to that and the actual skillful ways that we can do that. And we've seen some of that through. Of course, there have been a few presentations on climate assemblies that have been taking place around the world. Within our host area, Scotland, we've heard Doreen Grove's on the call, and she's going to tell me to use the word country. So I'll give one to you, Doreen. Within our host country, Scotland, there's of course some really exciting things being done around green participatory budgeting. Of course, the climate assembly that happened here. And outside the blue zone, in the green zone and inside the blue zone, there's been a lot of buzz around the Global Climate Assembly, which is the first attempt ever to do a global assembly that can really look at the issues being negotiated as far as damages and loss, as far as who needs to move first and how, and trying to create a representative group that actually reflects the diversity of the population and could become the vision. The organizers, when we sat down with some of the co-organizers for a meal the other day, the vision they articulated was that this could become a permanent international institution that has its own independent voice, that tries to bring in all those voices that aren't present and can't be present in Glasgow to be part of that what shapes the conversations here. It's a bold agenda, and we're really looking forward to seeing that develop this year and future years.
Thank you so much, Robin, for that perspective. And I think we're going to hear from some other folks as well who have been going in and out of these different layers of the onion that you just described. And again, hopefully that will lead us to some interesting ways and innovative ways to tackle climate engagement for effectiveness and for scaling up. So with that, I thank you, Robin, and please stay with us. Robin will be joining us in one of the breakout sessions after to continue the discussion with folks if you're interested to hear more. But now I'd like to welcome our three panelists this morning, wonderful panelists. So Carole Excell from World Resources Institute, Doreen Grove from the Government of Scotland, and Dr. Kanongnij from Chulalongkorn University. Welcome all three of you. We're so pleased to have you again from different parts of the world, representing different perspectives. And I'd like to start with Doreen, because Doreen is really our host here in Glasgow in a sense, and we've been very pleased to hear a lot about the important work the Government of Scotland has been doing around engagement, both through their Citizens Assembly, participatory budgeting, as Robin mentioned, and other perspectives. The Government of Scotland is also part of the Open Government Partnership. And Doreen, the one question I'd like to ask you, when you think about tackling such a huge issue as climate change and bringing citizens' voices into it, what for you makes the business case when you're talking to the political levels in your government about listening to citizen voices? How do you make the case for it? How do you make it clear that it is urgent to hear from people on this climate issue?
Thank you. I think I probably ought to say I don't really need to convince my government of that. The government in Scotland has really been quite thoughtful already about the need to involve people in just transition. So we had a Just Transition Commission that sat a group of experts, but we have also run a citizen assembly, which had 100 people from across Scotland looking at a whole range of issues, whether it was energy, food, education, all different aspects of it. But we also were really thoughtful about what we learned from them. And we had in parallel a group of 100 young people answering the same questions and learning from them the kinds of things that really mattered and the kinds of things that you need to explain to people for them to have a shared understanding of it. So the reason I like open government, and the reason my government is supportive of the open government work, is that it isn't just about either talking or listening. It's about making sure you are transparent, having the information available that people can see and understand what's happening, and then really sort of learn from. You can't do a citizen assembly for everything everywhere, but you can involve people in a whole range of different ways. So we've just completed our next Open Government Action Plan, which will run for the next 4 years, and that has within it a commitment to looking with civil society at how we effectively involve people in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of aspects of climate change. So I think the commitment's there. The resources aren't always easy to find, I think, anywhere. And there is also a sort of urgency that really stops us doing the things that we should do slowly over time. So we need to be really thoughtful about whether that urgency is real. And of course, we need to act really quickly, but we do need our whole population to come along with us. So all of that feels quite important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to bring Dr. Kanongnij on this. We heard about the announcements around ACE and how some of the language around human rights was stripped out of it. And we just heard from Doreen how important it was to involve all levels of society in these issues. So Dr. Kanongnij, could you tell us a little bit about your experience working in Thailand on the Clean Air Act and on how centering that notion of human rights was so important to make sure the voices and that the impact was there? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now it's all good. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to tell that I'm working as a law professor at the Faculty of Law, Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. But at the same time, I'm also one of co-founder of the so-called Thailand Clean Air Network, or the ThaiCAN, as a think tank working on the structural change for clean air. So we are the promoter of the clean air, okay? So by making the transition from air pollution issue to clean air issue and linked to the climate change agenda is kind of very at the beginning stage in our country. And these issues are very interlinked. As you can see that a number of health issues primarily caused by climate change due to air pollution. So our focus is not drafting one piece of legislation with nothing and weak or no law enforcement just like that. So this can happen due to the lack of understanding of both the government and civil society, while the administrative structure and existing laws still open some gap for managing the clean air or even climate change. The clean air as one type of natural resources are not that much well managed. So what we can do, at the same time, the green movement in Thailand working on clean air or climate change in the structural reform is quite limited and not be able to do that much in the kind of put pressure on the government to go for the structural change. So therefore, the Thai can tries to fill this gap by designing a draft of Clean Air Act as a bottom-up law, as a kind of partial law reform on clean air through the citizen initiative process, which is written in the Constitution that it's the right of citizen to initiate a new law, as the constitutional right of those citizens who are voters. So we follow this kind of structure by going from step to step in the initiative process according to the law. First, we write the proposal of the draft clean air law, submitted to the parliament for getting approval before circulating around in the country for public support. And then we must seek for at least 10,000 signatures of voters. Then we submit it again to the parliament for the next process of making law. About the human rights, of course, human rights is not only the legitimacy, but also legality. So it can be used to support us from birth to death, in igniting the issue on how we can see clean air as one type of right through what we call upgrading the right to breathe clean air, by separate this type of human right to become more explicitly written from other types of rights, such as right to life, right to good health, or lately, right to live in good environment. So as the matter of considering human rights cannot be divided from each other, it works all together in the same package. When one type of rights is violated, other types of rights are going to be violated too. So I use this as the way to communicate with public. How can we can get the real life to life if our life is shortened from, say, breathing PM 2.5 constantly, then what's gonna be left as the right, as the real right, as the real human right. So as WHO said, for example, PM 2.5 is one cause of premature death. Then I use this to demonstrate and convince the public in civil society to support my draft of law. So this draft of Clean Air Act established the right to breathe clean air. And once it is the right of people, then it is the duties of the state to respect, protect, and fulfill such the rights. So Thai can now submit initial submission of draft law. We circulate around and we got more than 24,000 signatures now already. And I will be ready to submit it to the parliament soon. So that's how we work together with the civil society through websites, social media, public events. We even have the project with the Faculty of Law to run the so-called Law Lab for Clean Air project, bringing the law students to understand the particular law and the new trend of how to do the change in the structural kind of problem like this. Yeah.
Thank you. An excellent framing, and I think that will lead very naturally to the question I had for Carole. Carole, could you tell us a little bit, when you think about today, how can governments become more participatory, and how can they integrate these notions in their approaches better?
Yes, thanks, Elodie. Just to also comment on your previous question quickly, I mean, what a disappointment that there wasn't human rights language recognized in this roadmap. That really puts us back from where we were previously, where the previous roadmap clearly spoke about rights to participate and rights of access to information. And we have to recognize that the Paris Agreement itself in Article 12 speaks directly to rights of public participation and access to information. So that unfortunately isn't a good sign, but I don't think, as you say, all is not lost. You know, I think all over the world, we recognize that there's this issue of closing civic space. I think Civicus's last report that they spoke, you know, still had a really unfortunate kind of sense of where we are. Like only 4% of the world's population live in countries with open civic space. You know, and so there's a big challenge, but governments can do a lot more to be participatory. And I think it starts off with recognizing that it's not only about consultation. Consultation is the bottom level of engagement. I think Doreen said it well. You know, Scotland has such an amazing example of, like, you know, really staying in the space of collaboration and empowerment is where they are in terms of how they see engagement with the public and citizens in decision-making all across a range of issues. And I think it's about building trust in governments, that it's both possible, that it's also, you know, it doesn't take, you know, millions of dollars to put in place the institutional arrangements that could require this just to be business as usual for key decision-making relating to climate. There's a way to institutionalize requirements for inclusive public participation. I think where the big challenge is, and I think this is where some of your work, Elodie, comes in, is how do you do this for the most vulnerable? I think that's where the biggest challenge is. How do you ensure those who have been made vulnerable by their circumstances, you know, Indigenous peoples who require different forms of participatory approaches, how do we ensure that we can get them in the table and, you know, ensure that they are able to help play a role in decision making? I think that's where the biggest challenge is around the globe. I don't think even the most developed countries have solved that. But for many other countries, I think it's about learning from others that this issue of institutionalization of inclusive participatory approaches, where you focus on empowering people to understand the issue before they deliberate, you spend the time and energy to do that, and you ensure that it's not one-off consultations, but you actually have an institutionalized process, is where we all need to be. So I think that's the big challenge. And in the climate change space, there's some exciting examples of countries that are doing that, cities that are doing that as well, really putting their effort in, you know, issues like green participatory budgeting, climate juries and assemblies, institutionalized councils that don't only participate one-off, but monitor implementation. All of these are really exciting new things that I think is really important for the climate community, not just the open government community, to really start embracing.
So I'm very happy you just said that, because one of the questions that we often get, especially for the folks here in the room who work with government, there is often a risk aversion of governments to do more participatory approaches. So if you were to hear that from a person in government, on the other hand, what kind of risk would they face in not engaging in more participatory ways to address this climate issue? And this is a question for all three of you, because I think as we deal with a systemic issue, we will need all parts of society to be engaged. And as you said, Carole, to be empowered, to have agency in making the change happen. So how would you describe those risks to governments that you are in conversations with? Who would like to take that one? What's the risk?
I can go first, and then maybe Doreen has the inside. She has an insider's view of how a government actually looks at the risk. For me, I just think that we've come to the realization that to address climate change, it takes systems change. And when we talk about systems change, it really means transforming so many systems that we have, from food systems to agricultural systems to transportation systems to educational systems. And to do that, I think most governments need to recognize they can't do it alone. Like, they need to bring citizens along the journey. If they don't, I think the huge risks are backlash, for failures when things go wrong, when there's flooding and wildfires. Why didn't you engage on this issue earlier? Why are we dealing with this loss and damage in our own communities? I think that creates huge risks. I also think there is a huge risk in many countries of this issue of misinformation being used to actually slow progress as well, if you don't bring citizens along on what decisions need to be taken by government, even the hard decisions that need to be taken, and bring them along in terms of understanding policy choices and why policy decisions are being made. So for me, the bigger risk of creating a system of misinformation that actually hampers the implementation of any policy that they eventually adopt, and also this issue of trying to ensure that citizens feel and people feel that they have a role to play. It's really important to bring them along. So I think it creates those risks if you ignore citizen engagement and participation. But I would put it over to Doreen to get an insight.
It's an interesting one, because I think everyone knows and has some sympathy with the position of politicians who all need to be re-elected at the next election. So that there is an imperative for them both to try and think long term, but also to think where their next election's coming from. That said, I think there is a real recognition that actually there are 2 or 3 things that have shifted the ground, if you like, around risk. COVID is one. We have seen that enormous wave of governments having to respond to a risk that was just extraordinary. And the governments that have done best undoubtedly are those that have worked with their population and been open and transparent. And I think certainly I see that increasingly inside government. But for me, the whole of the kind of open government agenda is important in this. You really do need to have transparency, because unless people can actually look at the information and understand it, and we know from the people who were on our climate assembly, some of that was quite scary. That fear of the amount of information. We have to be a trustworthy source for information. We have to be able to put that out in a way that is honest and open. But I think the risks for government of not being able to get compliance to the things that have to be done is really very real. And the pandemic demonstrated that unless you have a trusted government, then actually people won't comply. So if the more trusted your government is, the more people will say, well, I really should do that, or, I want to help. And it's not about forcing people. It is absolutely about sharing sufficient information and engaging people, which is why we're looking at things like participatory budgeting in just transition, where there are places where we can genuinely get people involved and making those shifts. It helps manage some of those risks.
The question of trust is an important one, I think, and from our research, we've seen trust decline in government institutions, but also in media and other institutions that are important for maintaining these systems, ensuring we transition to a carbon-free world adequately. So definitely the trust level, I think, needs to be upped, and that can only be done, as you said, with transparency. And I think accountability as well. Yeah. So Dr. Kanongnij, I know you thought a lot about the legal frameworks around accountability. Thoughts here?
In my situation, I can say that without the engagement of active citizens in the movement of green issues, whatever they are, is very dangerous because in certain atmosphere, certain political ecosystem like very much tend to have government oriented, as the single command and, mix up between the form and the substances, meaning somehow they use the word of the big words like SDG, SD, even whatever the world's slogan, etc. But in reality, it's not really represent its value. Somehow devalued by using only the form, but not the substance. And also without the involvement of citizens, tend to be the top-down kind of legislations, that very much government-oriented with a very less level, a very low level of public participation. And this going to be, not supportive enough for the commitment from citizens in playing that role, and altogether will bring to the weak implementation, the weak law enforcement, and destroy the whole ladders of communication and public involvement. From the very beginning level, like awareness building to understanding what's going on around, and also up level like consultation, or and that's why I prefer to jump up to the highest level of the ladder in terms of drafting the law, by the citizen support. So that to skip like that, it doesn't mean that I ignore the kind of the lower level of public participation, but I can see that with no engagement of citizens that are very strongly active, tend to be everything going to be a single command and very narrow oriented, and support only certain groups of interests, groups of people. So that there's chaos if there's no engagement at all, even though it's quite difficult in our kind of situation, but we still have to work, just like that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's interesting to think about that top-down approach, because we know it's what also slowed down the UNFCCC process for so long. It was a top-down approach, and it was not until the Paris Agreement that a different approach was proposed, and finally we started to make some progress. So I think that's also a good lesson for all of us when we think about engagement. When do we need to move between the top-down up and have some more lateral approaches that engage people at as you said, a higher rung of that ladder for more deeper involvement and agency. But I'd like, before we move on to the breakout rooms, I also want to ask you, because we have so many practitioners of climate engagement here, think about climate engagement. What are some of the key questions we should ask ourselves when we think about scaling up? So a lot of interesting initiatives have happened across. I think now we need much deeper engagement, but also engagement at a much wider scale. And we've heard from Robin a little bit about the Global Assembly, and we have some folks who are working on the Global Assembly with us today. But what are some of the key considerations we need to keep in mind thinking about scaling up engagement, as we will need to in the years to come? Anybody would like to take that one?
Can I take it first?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
And then I'll go to Doreen after.
I think deeper and wider at the same time is quite difficult, especially in a very limited opportunity like us. So I prefer to go deeper on the specific area. like what I'm working now is only clean air, but we are going to move forward to climate change issue. Now we draft the Clean Air Act. Later we'll draft the Climate Change Act. For example, this is kind of deeper. But for the wider, I feel like we need a strong networking among civil society groups of who work on the similar issues, because it's a very large topic. So upscale on this matter required both the depth and the width, but one thing at a time. We cannot step up from both dimensions at the same time because of the very limited resources, and the situation is not that easy. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm sure Doreen will also have things to say about the resource question. Doreen, go ahead.
Give me some money. Much more seriously, there are two things. One is I think I would question the phrase scale up. I think it's much more about making this part of doing business. Whenever anyone's starting any aspect of this work, thinking who else needs to be involved, who else is really badly affected by this. One of the things that we're trying to get into our participation work at the moment, and we are looking at institutionalizing, and really I do need some money for that, but the whole sort of thing that emerges is if you have people who are excluded. So every country, and Carole, you're absolutely right, there isn't a single place that has solved the problem of inequality. We're all have unequal societies, but what we're looking at in trying to help us get make sure that we are really properly involving people is finding the people furthest away from government who are most affected by things, and starting there, and then you will find that the people on the way back in are easier to solve. I don't have a magic answer for this, but we will look at a whole different range of ways of doing it. There's not just one method. It's not just that if you use user design, it will work. If you use citizen assemblies, it will work. If you use PB, it will work. It has to be part of your thinking. Who do you need to be involved in order to get this done effectively? We have a Community Empowerment Act in Scotland, which looks at that idea of equal empowerment, and that's due for a revision in a couple of years. And being thoughtful as we move towards that, of the what more can you do, and how do you make it so it's not an expensive add-on, so that it's part of your work and it's expected to be part of your work. That is different for a lot of public servants who are under great pressure to do things quickly or to do things efficiently. So that there is a real tension there that needs to be sorted through. And I don't think any place will get it entirely right, but we have to share that learning, which is another thing that is, so events like this and events that are looking at how you do that involvement, really sharing that learning really matters, because actually somebody else will be facing the same problem as you are somewhere. Had the most fantastic conversation with somebody from French Polynesia yesterday morning at COP, and thought, yeah, do you know, their islands are face very similar problems to ours. Of course, that conversation is useful.
Thank you. And maybe Carole?
Yeah, Elodie, I was just going to come in. Yes, I'll just come in and I'll try to be quick because I know we need to go to the breakout groups. I totally agree with what Doreen said. Institutionalization, I think, is one way for countries to consider to ensure that people can engage on a wide range of decisions that are directly related to climate change impacts. But of course, that takes time, and it takes policies, and it takes capacity of institutions to be able to put in those policies, procedures, and laws to make that happen. I also think there are a couple of power players and I think Doreen also spoke about politicians who have to engage and agree that this is something that they want to do and recognize the risks if they don't. So I think that is really important. I think we're doing a project right now that's looking at assessing how cities are doing in this space, what kind of climate engagement processes they're using. And I think it's really important for us to look at both the national and city level and see what the learnings are in those different spaces and see how we can bring together leaders in both of those spaces. But there are also leaders in civil society and other groups as well who are, innovating in this space. So having, sharing of lessons between both government and civil society is also really important. I'll just say one last thing, this issue of a just transition and how do we get there is so critical. And, there are groups like, as was said, that are most impacted, whether it's workers or women or, in certain circumstances who may lose their livelihoods or farmers. And I think also they're thinking through how do you create engagement spaces that actually bring together these groups with decision makers to make tough choices, but to really understand the issues ahead and not think of just next year, because these issues, some of them are long-term issues that affect people's livelihoods and their communities and even their lives. And so thinking through, as was said, how do you learn from each other from these different approaches, I think just is really, really key if we want to really tackle how climate engagement can help us create ambitious policies and programs to address the impacts that are facing the world. Thanks.
Thank you. And really thinking about integration and again, collaboration across the board. So that is exactly what we'll be doing in the next few minutes. And I'm glad somebody shared in the chat a little tool called Participedia, which is actually a repository of case studies around engagement across the world, from small scale, large scale, looking at different approaches, different methodologies. So I do encourage folks to take a look at participedia.net, and that's in the chat if you're right. So let's move on to our next phase of today's discussion. We're going to be talking to a lot of partners and collaborators from across the world who do this every day and hear a little bit about how they're approaching it as well. So when you have a list of topics, so I'll go through them quite quickly. We'll have one room looking at climate assemblies and citizen deliberation, and that will be with NOCA and Democratic Society. We will have a room looking at place-based and relationship-based engagement, and that will be with our friends from Purakita and Public Agenda. Large-scale engagement with the Danish Board of Technology and someone from Public Agenda. Engagement for systems change, and that will be with the Center for Public Impact, Chulalongkorn University, and my colleagues from the Center for Dialogue. One room will talk about equity, awareness in climate engagement, and that will be with People Powered and myself. And we had a lot of interest around city engagement, so we created two different rooms. One more looking at text-based technologies and ways of doing climate engagement for cities with Democratic Society, and cities and participatory budgeting with IOPT. And finally, if you're interested in the government partnership approach and how they do this work in an integrated fashion, that will be with Open Partnership and the Government of Scotland in the 8th room. So I'm going to invite you now to go to the bottom of your screen. You should have a little button that says breakout room, and you'll be able to press on that and select the room that you want to join. And you'll have about 25 minutes with these host partners who will tell you a little bit about their experience, and it'll give you a chance to also share your own knowledge and stories. So I hope everybody has a great conversation, and we'll see you back in roughly 25 minutes.
ในช่วงไม่กี่เดือนที่ผ่านมาด้วยนะครับขีปนาวุธที่น่าจับตามองในเวลานี้
I can't get into group one for some reason. Can you send me that?
Okay, so if somebody could send our friend over to room one. So our tech host, if you're having difficulty, just let us know in the chat, and our tech host will move you to that particular room.
รายงานของกระทรวงกลาโหมสหรัฐเนี่ยบอกว่าจีนซ้อมรบด้วย ระสุนจริงในทะเลจีนใต้เป็นครั้งแรกเมื่อเดือนกรกฎาคมปีที่แล้วด้วยการยิงขีปนาวุธ EF-21E จำนวน 6 ลูก
Melvin, could you put Graham Smith in room 1, please? I think Graham's having issues joining the room, and he is the host there. Anyone else having difficulties joining, perhaps?
Yes, I do have difficulties as well to join room 6.
Okay, so our technical host is going to move you there.
Thank you.
I also need to be moved to room 8. Sorry, not 9. I'm the host there, but I can't seem to join it.
Okay, wonderful. So I think our technical host is just manually moving folks right now. Apologies for that not being as seamless as we hoped for. Again, just let us know in the chat if you're having difficulties.
Having difficulty moving to room 7, please.
Okay. Who was that who needed to move from room 7?
Weena.
Weena, thank you.
And this is Melissa Barbanel. I just asked to be moved to room 8.
Thank you, Melissa.
And Adna, I need to be moved to room 8. I'm the host there.
It is not an easy session today, folks. I am so sorry for that. This is what we call our NASA moments. You know, NASA always has a moment where something goes wrong. So we are, let's see, I think almost everybody's moved now. We have a few people still. Please do let us know. For those who are joining again, maybe you're having some connection issues. You can press the breakout room button at the bottom of your screen to join one of the rooms. And if you're having difficulties doing that, please let us know in the chat and we will move you there. So Robin, perhaps we can move you to room 4, if that's okay. I see Allison, Amani. Please do let us know where you'd like to go and we'll move you there. Okay, I am going to move myself to the breakout I am supposed to be at. But again, if you're having difficulties, please do let us know in the chat and we will try to get you to the place you are going to. And I will see you back in about 20 minutes.
Hi.
Hello there, do you need assistance?
Yes, I want to go, please let me see, in the cities and climate engagement session.
Cities and climate engagement?
Yes, the sixth one.
Okay, I will sign you in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
นะครับผมว่ามันเป็นสองสินค้า2ธุรกิจสำคัญถ้าเป็นเรื่องสินค้าผมคิดว่ายากเพราะว่าใหญ่เรื่องเป็นสินค้า
กุ้งนะคะแต่เมืองนี้มีเสน่ห์มีอะไรที่แตกต่างไปจากอีก2เมืองนะคะอย่างที่อาจารย์ได้เล่าให้ฟังเมื่อกี้ค่ะ
Elodie, you're muted.
There's always that moment when you forget you're muted. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had good conversations in your breakout rooms. We do realize it was very short and probably very fast paced for all of you. But I hope that was enlightening and exciting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite our host partners to each share a very brief aha moment or a highlight of the conversation they had with you so that we can get a bit of a sense of what happened in the other rooms. So I'm going to start with Graham, if Graham's still with us. I know Graham has to read. What excited you or tickled you pink?
Tickled my pink. Gosh, that's a great phrase. So I think the one thing that I really liked was this discussion. One of our colleagues talked about about the soft power of climate assemblies, which isn't directed in terms of, it isn't just about achieving legislative outcomes. And if we just think about climate assemblies as a body that achieves legislative outcomes, will often be disappointed. But actually there's a soft power of them which affects other stakeholders, which affects civil society. And the question we were beginning to discuss before you rudely pulled us back in was this question of how can we design assemblies with that idea of soft power in mind in a way that we probably aren't at the moment. So really exciting. And if you're interested in carrying on these conversations, come and join Kanongnij. This has been great, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be posting the links to all the host partner organizations in the chat. So I encourage all the participants to go check out the wonderful work that is being done, Kanongnij being one of them. There's some really fantastic things happening in what is really a learning community. So again, opportunities to share how we're doing it. I'm going to go to Alexa next. Alexa, in less than a minute, something that excited you or again, really pushed the boundaries of what you're doing right now?
Well, I was in the same room as Graham. So my first answer would be also this question that we were talking about, the soft power of assemblies. I think another interesting question that was raised was how assemblies or climate assemblies enable us to break down the divisions between scales of government levels and silos that governments like to work in, that technocrats like to work in, but that maybe our systems don't actually work in. And the citizens or peoples or climate assemblies are one of the ways that we're able to actually break down some of those boundaries.
Thank you, great points. So we're going to talk a little bit now about place-based and relationship engagement. So I'd like to invite Nina. Nina, a quick thought from your breakout discussion.
So we had experiences from Kutugitas and also public agenda, and actually we share the same issues, like contextualizing the approaches that we want to deliver towards the climate actions is actually really important, because maybe the community and in the ground doesn't understand the language of climate change. So we showed, like how to define this into creative and innovative methods. Like Tristan said, we use games, like photo cards and discussions, like we should engage the meaningful participation from each level of the community. I think that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I really encourage folks to check out the wonderful work done both by Kutukita and Public Agenda. There's some fabulous things happening there. Tristan, let's go to you. Anything that you'd like to add to what Nina said, or something else that really excited you today?
Yeah, I think, a part of the discussion started to go toward, the challenge of defining success in climate engagement, but also, the challenge of working towards not only giving people knowledge, but empowering them to activate that knowledge and giving them space to practice becoming leaders and giving them room and connecting them to policymakers, to researchers. So I think, just kind of creating in climate engagement, creating space for there to be that nexus of connection between community members, researchers, policymakers, and making sure they not only have a seat at the table, but have the resources they need to participate at the table.
Thank you. I think Nikhil also joined you from People Powered. Nikhil, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I think one thing that Tristan said that was great was the importance of meeting people where they're at. And I think that people do understand that climate change is a problem. They just might not understand it in the same way that the elites do. So it's important to, come at it from a position of respect, and also to be open to hearing other interpretations of these climate issues.
Yeah, understanding the different ways people make meaning of an issue. Yes, thank you so much for that. Really important points. Next, we're going to go to large scale engagement, and I'm going to invite Bjorn to give us again something interesting or exciting that you heard about in your room.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part was that probably we don't really know what we talk about when we talk about scaling. We talk about many different things. We talk about bigger numbers of citizens. We talk about reaching multinational governance levels. We talk about connecting the mini public to to the maxi public. And we also talk about different reasons for scaling. We talk about political legitimacy. We talk about, again, reaching the right policy decision makers, and we talk about achieving bigger impact. So there's a lot of discussions there. What do we mean by scaling, and why would we want to scale?
Mm-hmm. Important questions also to think about what those different levels look like and where do we want to have impact and influence. Really good points. So in your room, I think you also had Claire Millier. Claire, would you like to share a thought as well?
Yeah, I'm afraid the camera is not really doing justice. I'm confused, but anyway, I'll switch off my camera for the benefit of everyone. I suppose that's the question of the definition came up very quickly because it looks like I don't think we have a clear actually understanding of what we mean by scaling up, and I suppose with the Global Assembly we're trying to scale up in different ways at different levels, both scaling up in terms of the governance level, scaling up in terms of numbers, with the approach we've developed of the core assembly and community assemblies, but also scaling up in the sense of connecting what deliberative democracy expert called connecting the mini public with the maxi public, which is engaging beyond the walls of the assembly through different ways of communicating, and that's through the cultural wave and engaging artists. So yeah, that's the summary in terms of the Global Assembly's perspective, I would say.
Thank you, Claire. And I believe we also had Quijada in your room. Quijada, also something to share?
Yes, I think my colleagues have shared much of what we discussed, but I'll just add a little bit, which is I think that as we talked about this issue of scale, I was really struck by how different engagement strategies yield different outcomes. And that's why engagement design is so important and being really intentional about that. And just to give some examples, if the goal is to just get a gut check from citizens on how they feel about a policy, maybe you just want some kind of quick hit digital platform where people can very quickly react and thousands can share how they feel. If the goal around scale is to really shift systems and do sustained work over time where you're building relationships, then you might want to do more of a dialogic process in small groups, where hundreds of people are meeting for months and really getting to know each other across the city. So that was a helpful takeaway, I think.
So really understanding what is the objective, what are we trying to achieve here, and then designing something bespoke for that particular objective. Really good points. Something I think any practitioner would need to be reminded of. Next, I think we had a discussion around systems change, which again, to Claire's point, is sometimes not defined in the same way by everybody. But I'd like to invite Dr. Kanongnij and Robin Press to maybe share a couple of words here. Let's start with Dr. Kanongnij.
Yeah, I would like to say something about to scale up or to work out on the next stage of climate engagement. We cannot lean on the citizen side, but also how to cooperate with the government people, and how to make the business sector to really cooperate by changing the paradigm, the pattern of working in terms of investment, the long-term kind of investment, thinking about the green business, green finance, etc. I think if civil society can hold hand in hand with the business sector, then the bargaining power going to be much greater to deal with and even negotiate with the government side. I don't believe that with the strength of the civil society sector alone is enough. So in collaborating, in convincing, in negotiating, and switching from the traditional style of management to the new one is necessary for all of us. And I'm working on the social engagement all the way through. So I still have a strong belief that without the key player like citizen, things gonna be chaos and disaster.
Thank you. Let's go to Robin Press next for again a quick thought, Robin.
Thanks, Elodie. So one thought here is that in order to make systems change, you don't have to burn down the current system all the time. Sometimes you can make small hacks to existing systems to make a huge difference. So I'll give a couple of concrete examples. If you're in a school system, you can move from a didactic form of climate education to a system where you empower students through participatory budgeting to make decisions about how to allocate resources and to come up with proposals. If you're within a university, you can move from a system where you're writing theoretical essays that go into the recycling bin to one where you're challenging students to do mapping work with you in your community or to come up with solutions to things like transportation or other issues. If you're having an advisory committee or a traditional structure, you can move from a system that privileges the incumbents, which are yesterday's industries, and you can invite in groups to those tables who are going to be most affected by climate change to rebalance the conversation. So you make the small hack to the way the system's operating, and then you build in the feedback loops to make to create a commitment for decision makers to respond and get into an iterative conversation that creates amplification and ongoing feedback and builds that movement for change.
Thank you. That's really great points there. That you talked about participatory budgeting, because I believe our next group had a bit of a conversation about that. So let's go to Adria and Mame to hear what happened in that room.
Hi everyone. Elodie, thank you. We finally joined the group with Nadia, so we have the conversation on the role of also participatory budget, but more general in how bottom-up practices from the local level. And I really want to highlight, I think, the importance of the role of the local level of governments, of local governments, as really innovators and making practices more like risking taking. So I think it's very important to recognize this role of the local governments in have this innovative role and transgressive role in these different policies, and also to bet on democratic innovations, not only on participatory budgeting, but also in citizens' assembly and other practices. Also in the idea to disseminate, promote, and support ecological transformation in population. No? And our idea also is the introduction of the idea of climate justice in participatory budgeting, in participatory practices. So the idea to have the idea of decentralized cooperation and try to help the more affected communities by impacts of climate change. So that's our main point. And very excited to be in this session, and we want to continue working all together to drive these changes.
Thank you. And I love that we're talking about cities, because we know a lot of the climate impacts are in cities, but also a lot of the most exciting work is happening at the city level. Nadia or Mame, would you like to share just a quick thought as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Elodie. I think one of the most striking points that we discussed were two examples, one from Tanzania and then also from Thailand, that just highlighted the question of the relationship between civil society and the city itself, the local government, and how we can shape that relationship to ensure that cities and local government actually empower and enable the people and the bottom-up social innovation that we're seeing all over the place to actually come up and be scaled across the board. And I think those are some of the interesting questions that came out of our session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mame, any thoughts? I'm not sure if Mame's still with us. Okay, well, let's end the open government group with Adna and Doreen. Any exciting things from the open government discussion?
Thanks, Elodie. I'll make it really fast because I know we're out of time. we ended up having a very Canada-focused conversation, actually. I just think it was a good conversation to really realize some of the challenges with creating solidarity in terms of advocacy towards government on engagement and inclusion of different views and opening up that process, because we heard frustration, about the lack of progress, about not enough ambition, still too many close links with industry, fossil fuels, and so on, but also the challenge of creating sort of a more organized civil society role in that process because of the size of Canada, the diversity, but also hearing about how really sort of the First Nations and Indigenous peoples have been probably the most effective at that. So I think it was just sort of a realistic conversation about some of the challenges, but also something that I definitely want to follow up on, having had that specific Canada conversation.
Thank you, Adna. And Doreen, you've been such a great advocate for the Open Government Partnership and the work they do. One last thought as we close off today.
I mean, from the breakout group, the thing that struck me is the importance of scrutiny, the role of scrutiny and getting citizens involved. I think it was as Adna said, a really salutary conversation. I do remember a friend of mine saying, don't expect the public and indeed civil society organisations to be ready, willing, or even prepared to talk to government. So we have to work at that.
Thank you. And that's a perfect way to end, because I just wanted to let folks know our team will be working again with other partners from the Tyndall Centre here in the UK and past. We'll be hosting an event in the Blue Zone tomorrow with other partners from civil society from across the world to talk a little bit more about the importance of climate engagement and the integration with civil society and why that is necessary. So that will be in the Strangford Loch room. It's the large auditorium in the Blue Zone, and there are some details in the chat. You can join us in the Blue Zone. It will also be live broadcast on the UNFCCC's YouTube channel. So you're welcome to watch us there. I want to thank everyone for the time they took today to be with us, and also thank all our partners. And you'll see them on the screen here. I'm not going to list them all, there's so many. But again, this is really an invitation to continue to collaborate across borders, across sectors, and across practice. Have a small piece of this puzzle, and I think if we put all our brains together, we'll be able to really achieve great results in terms of bringing our emissions down globally and really bringing the voices of citizens into this conversation in a fair and equitable way, which is the path forward, as I've mentioned today. So again, a great big thank you to all of you for joining us today. It was a real pleasure for us on the Center for Dialogue side, and I hope we'll see you all again very soon. And yes, please, we will be sending you a follow-up email with a short survey and listing some more resources from our partners that you might want to look at. So look for that email in your inbox very soon. Thank you all very much, and good luck to those of you who are still running into events today at COP or planning with civil society for movements. So big thank you to all, and we will see you all very soon. Have a fantastic day, night, or morning, wherever you are in the world today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.